At a luxurious gala, a paralyzed millionaire feels an emptiness despite his immense fortune. Among the social elite, he is ignored until two young girls approach and look at him intensely. One of them, with wise words, says, "Your heart aches more than your legs," touching his spirit. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. Continuing, the fine June rain trickled down the enormous windows of the Plaza Hotel, creating a melancholic veil over the view of Central Park, which stretched infinitely into the darkness of the New York night. Inside the main ballroom, the golden light from Czech crystal chandeliers illuminated one of the year's most exclusive charity galas, organized by the Hope Foundation for Vulnerable Children. The atmosphere exuded luxury and ostentation, with floral arrangements that cost more than many families' annual salaries and guests dressed in designer clothes that glittered under the artificial light. Among the smiling faces and superficial conversations about business and social status, the solitary figure of Edward Harrison Thorne, 42, stood out, seated in his custom-made titanium wheelchair valued at $100,000. His dark brown eyes observed the movement around him with an expression that mixed boredom and melancholy. Edward was known throughout the country as the founder and CEO of Innovatech America, one of the largest technology companies in North America, valued at billions of dollars. His digital empire had revolutionized the way Americans connected to the internet, but all his wealth could not fill the void that grew in his chest with each passing day. 15 years ago, a car accident on the West Side Highway had changed his life forever. Edward was driving his red Ferrari in the early hours of a Sunday morning when a drunk driver ran a red light, violently colliding with the left side of his car. The impact fractured his spinal column at the second lumbar vertebra, leaving him irreversibly paraplegic. At the time, at 27, he was a young entrepreneur full of dreams and energy, about to launch his first startup. The accident could have destroyed everything, but Edward channeled his frustration and pain into an iron determination to prove he was still capable of conquering the world, even without the use of his legs. Over the following years, he built a technological empire that impressed even the most skeptical international investors. His company developed innovative software, revolutionary applications, and digital solutions that made life easier for millions of Americans. Edward became a respected figure in the business world, gracing magazine covers and being invited to speak at the country's main entrepreneurship events. However, behind the facade of success and determination, he carried a profound loneliness that all the money in the world could not cure. That gala night, Edward had attended more out of social obligation than genuine interest. His press aide, Francesca, had insisted that his presence was important for the company's image and to demonstrate his commitment to social causes. He watched the other guests with a mixture of disdain and silent envy. He saw couples dancing on the central floor, executives closing deals between sips of French champagne, and socialites showing off their expensive jewelry while pretending to care about needy children. Everyone there had something he felt he had lost forever, the ability to move freely through the world, to feel the ground beneath their feet, to run, jump, or simply stand up whenever they wanted. The event had been organized to raise funds for the construction of a new children's rehabilitation center in the Bronx. Edward had made a generous donation of $500,000, more for tax and corporate image reasons than out of genuine compassion. He felt disconnected from social causes, focused only on expanding his business and accumulating even more wealth, as if each new million could fill the emotional hole growing in his soul. While distractedly savoring a smoked salmon canapé, Edward noticed two girls who stood out among the other children present at the event. They appeared to be between 8 and 10 years old, wore identical navy blue dresses, and had long, straight brown hair that framed faces of a peculiar and unsettling beauty. While the other children ran around the ballroom, played or chatted animatedly with the adults, these two remained still near the dessert table, observing everything around them with a seriousness that contrasted with their apparent age. There was something in their eyes that bothered Edward in a way he couldn't explain. They were large eyes, of a deep, penetrating blue that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. They moved in perfect sync, as if sharing the same thoughts, and occasionally whispered to each other in a tone so low that no one else could hear. Edward noticed that other guests were also watching them discreetly, some with curiosity, others with visible discomfort, as if they sensed there was something different about those girls. The event organizer, Mrs. Marcia Croft, a 60-year-old woman known for her dedication to charitable causes, approached Edward, gently pushing the two girls' wheelchairs in his direction. She smiled with that kind of forced smile people often use when they want to introduce needy children to wealthy businessmen, hoping to awaken charitable feelings and, consequently, even larger donations. "Edward, dear, I'd like you to meet Isabella and Sophia Meadows," Mrs. Croft said in a syrupy, artificial voice. "They are twin sisters and have been with us for a few months. They are very special girls, very intelligent and mature for their age. I'm sure you'll get along wonderfully." Edward looked at the girls with the polite but distant expression he usually wore in social situations. He was used to being introduced to children at charity events, usually shy boys and girls who looked at him with a mixture of admiration and pity, not knowing how to behave in front of an adult in a wheelchair. He expected these two to be like the others, that he could exchange a few polite words, make a kind comment about their dresses, and then elegantly get rid of them. However, when Isabella and Sophia stood before him, something completely unexpected happened. Instead of showing shyness or childish curiosity about his physical condition, they stared at him with a disturbing intensity, as if they could read his innermost thoughts. There was no pity in their gazes, nor admiration for the rich and famous man. There was only a deep and mysterious understanding that made Edward feel completely exposed and vulnerable. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne," said Isabella, who was slightly ahead of her sister. Her voice was soft but laden with a maturity that did not match her childlike appearance. "We know who you are. We know about your company, your accident, everything you've achieved since." Sophia, who had remained silent until then, took a step forward and added, "But we also know that you're not happy, that all this wealth can't heal the pain you carry inside your chest. The pain goes far beyond the legs that don't work." Edward felt a shiver run down his spine. It was impossible for two children so young to have such insight into his private life. He tried to maintain his composure, but he felt he was facing something that completely escaped his rational and scientific understanding of the world. "You are very perceptive girls," he replied, trying to sound casual while processing the impact of those words. "But I believe you are mistaken about me. I have a very full and satisfying life." Isabella and Sophia glanced at each other for a moment, and Edward had the strange impression that they were communicating silently. Then Isabella smiled in a way that was simultaneously childish and ancient, as if she carried the wisdom of decades of experience. "We are not mistaken, Mr. Thorne," she said gently, "and we want to help you. We can show you things you never imagined were possible, things that medicine cannot explain, but which have always existed." Mrs. Croft, who had momentarily stepped away to greet other guests, returned to the group just as Sophia added, "If you wish, we can talk in private, away from all these curious eyes and ears that judge without understanding." Edward looked around and noticed that, indeed, several people were watching the conversation with poorly disguised interest. Some whispered among themselves, probably speculating about what two orphan children could be discussing so seriously with the wealthiest businessman at the party. "Perhaps it would be better to go somewhere more private," Edward agreed, feeling a curiosity he hadn't experienced in years. "Mrs. Croft, would it be possible for us to use one of the smaller rooms in the hotel for a few minutes?" The organizer nodded, leading the small group to a meeting room adjacent to the main ballroom. The atmosphere was more intimate, decorated with fine wood furniture and a panoramic view of the Central Park South skyline. Edward positioned his wheelchair near the window, while the girls sat in armchairs that seemed far too large for their small bodies. "Now we can speak more freely," Edward said, studying the sisters' faces with an attention he hadn't devoted to anything in a long time. "What exactly do you want to tell me?" Isabella took a deep breath as if preparing for a conversation of extreme importance. "Mr. Thorne, we know you are a very intelligent person, that you built an incredible company using only your mind and your determination. But we also know that there is something in your body that the doctors said was lost forever." And we can help you find that something, Sophia completed, with a conviction that made Edward shiver again. We have a gift that our mother taught us before she passed, a knowledge of energies and healing that few people in the world possess. Edward felt a mix of skepticism and fascination. His entire education in engineering and business had taught him to distrust anything that couldn't be measured, tested, and scientifically proven. At the same time, there was something in the presence of those girls that challenged his rational logic, something that made him question certainties he had held for decades. "Are you talking about spiritual healing, alternative medicine?" he asked, trying to maintain a neutral tone. "With all due respect, girls, I've consulted the best neurologists and orthopedists in the world. I've undergone dozens of treatments, advanced physical therapies, experimental surgeries. My spinal cord injury is irreversible." Isabella shook her head gently, with a patience that seemed disproportionate to her age. "The doctors only see what the equipment shows, Mr. Thorne, but there is a vital energy that flows through all of us, a force that can awaken dormant abilities. Our mother taught us to see this energy, to work with it." Sophia got up from her armchair and walked until she was very close to Edward's wheelchair. "If you will allow us, we can show you a little of what we are capable of. We don't promise instant miracles, but we guarantee that you will feel something you long believed you had lost forever." Edward looked into the girl's eyes and saw absolute sincerity. There was no manipulation or financial interest in that gaze, only a genuine desire to help. For the first time in many years, he felt truly seen and understood by someone. "And why do you want to help me?" he asked, still trying to find a rational logic for the whole situation. "What do you gain from this?" The two sisters looked at each other again, and Edward realized they really did seem to share thoughts. Isabella answered with a touching simplicity, "Because we feel your pain, Mr. Thorne, and because our mother taught us that we should use our gifts to alleviate the suffering of good people. And you are a good person," Sophia added, "even if you sometimes don't believe it." The businessman felt a strange emotion forming in his throat. How long had it been since someone saw him simply as a good person, without interest in his fortune or social status? How long had it been since he himself had seen himself that way? "All right," he said finally, surprising himself with his own decision. "I don't know why, but I trust you. What do I need to do?" Isabella smiled, and for the first time since the conversation began, her expression was purely childish, full of joy and expectation. "Just close your eyes and allow yourself to feel, Mr. Thorne. Don't think, don't analyze, don't question. Just feel." Edward obeyed, closing his eyes and trying to relax in his chair. He felt the girl's small, warm hands placed on his legs, a sensation he hadn't experienced so intensely in a long time. Normally, the touch on his lower limbs was just a mechanical pressure without any real neural connection. But something was different. Isabella and Sophia's hands seemed to radiate a special warmth, an energy he couldn't explain but could definitely perceive. It was as if small waves of gentle electricity were coursing through his dormant muscles, awakening sensations he believed had died along with his mobility. "What are you doing?" he whispered, keeping his eyes closed. "We are talking to your body," Isabella answered softly, "asking it to remember what it was like to be whole." Edward felt a tear roll down his face, something that hadn't happened in years. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of hope, of possibility, of connection to something greater that his rational mind couldn't comprehend. When he finally opened his eyes, he found the two girls watching him with a maternal tenderness that completely contrasted with their apparent ages. Sophia gently wiped the tear from his face as a mother would for her child. "This was just the beginning, Mr. Thorne," she said with a reassuring smile. "If you want to continue, we can meet again. But now you need to go back to the party before people start asking questions you're not ready to answer yet." Edward nodded, still processing what he had just experienced. He felt different, as if something inside him had been slightly altered, awakened from a deep sleep. He couldn't explain what had happened, but he knew his life was about to change in a way he could never have imagined. As they returned to the main ballroom, Edward watched Isabella and Sophia walking beside his wheelchair. and realized that for the first time in 15 years, he didn't feel like an incomplete man. He felt like someone who was about to discover aspects of himself he never knew existed. The party was still in full swing, but Edward was no longer present. In that superficial environment of luxury and ostentation, his mind was completely focused on those two mysterious girls who had appeared in his life like an unexpected gift from fate. He did not yet know that this meeting would be just the first step on a journey that would transform not only his physical condition, but his entire understanding of what it means to be truly human. The days following the encounter at the gala passed like a strange haze for Edward. He tried to focus on his usual business activities, meetings with foreign investors interested in expanding Innovatech America to other countries in North America, and financial reports showing record growth in the last quarter. However, his mind always returned to those moments in the private room of the hotel, to the small, warm hands of Isabella and Sophia on his legs, to the inexplicable sensation of awakening he had experienced. For 15 years, Edward had grown accustomed to the rigid routine of his new reality. He would wake up at 5 in the morning in his Upper East Side penthouse apartment, do strengthening exercises for his arms and torso in his private gym, shower with the help of special adaptations he had imported from Germany, dress in custom-tailored suits specifically cut for wheelchair users, and head to his office in Hudson Yards. His schedule was filled with appointments that kept him busy from 7 in the morning until 9 at night, an efficient way to avoid confronting the emotional void that grew silently within him. But now, for the first time in a long time, Edward found himself thinking about something other than spreadsheets and corporate strategies. He constantly recalled the girls' penetrating gaze, the disconcerting maturity in their words, the way they seemed to see right into his soul. Most of all, he couldn't stop thinking about the physical sensation he had experienced during those brief minutes. It hadn't been his imagination. He had truly felt something in his legs, a neural connection that doctors had declared impossible. On the Thursday following the event, Edward called his personal assistant Carla, a 35-year-old woman who had worked with him for nearly a decade and knew every aspect of his professional and personal life. Carla was one of the few people Edward trusted completely. She had started as an intern at Innovatech America and grown with the company, becoming practically his right hand in all matters requiring discretion and efficiency. "Carla, I need you to do some research for me," Edward said while signing some contracts at his solid rosewood desk. "I want to know everything about two girls who were at the Hope Foundation charity gala on Monday. Twin sisters, Isabella and Sophia Meadows. They looked to be between 8 and 10 years old." Carla looked up from the tablet where she was noting the next day's appointments. She had known Edward long enough to recognize when something had genuinely piqued his interest, which rarely happened. In recent years, he had become increasingly withdrawn and focused exclusively on work. "Do you want any specific information about them?" she asked, already mentally running through the contacts she could use to get the necessary information. "Everything," Edward replied without hesitation. "Family history, current situation, where they live, how they ended up at the foundation, anything you can find out. And Carla, do it discreetly. I don't want anyone to know I'm investigating children." Carla nodded professionally, but Edward noticed a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. She knew he had never shown any particular interest in matters related to children or charity work, attending such events only for social and corporate image obligations. 2 hours later, Carla knocked gently on Edward's office door, carrying a folder with documents and an expression that mixed surprise and concern. "I got the information you asked for," she said, sitting in the armchair opposite his desk. "But I have to warn you, it's a rather disturbing story." Edward gestured for her to continue, mentally preparing himself to hear something that would confirm his suspicions that there was much more to those girls than met the eye. "Isabella and Sophia Meadows were born in a small town in the Hudson Valley in 2014, Carla began, consulting her notes. "Their mother was named Helena Meadows, a 28-year-old woman who worked as an alternative therapist and practitioner of holistic medicine. The father was never officially identified." Edward leaned forward, absorbing every word. Helena was known in the upstate region for her unconventional treatment methods. She combined medicinal herbs with techniques some people called energy healing. She had a loyal clientele, especially among people who had exhausted the options of traditional medicine. And what happened to her? Edward asked, though he suspected the answer would not be positive. Carla sighed before continuing. Helena passed away in 2020, when the girls were only 6 years old. Officially, it was a sudden heart attack, but neighbors reported that she had been showing strange symptoms in the weeks prior, talking to herself, having visions, saying she was transferring her gifts to her daughters before she left. The businessman felt a shiver run down his spine. The story was becoming more intriguing and disturbing with every detail. After their mother's death, the girls were placed in the Child Protective Services system, Carla continued, and this is where the situation gets really strange. They've been through 5 different foster families in the last 2 years. No family could keep them for more than a few months. Why? The reports mention atypical behavior for their age and unexplained phenomena in the children's presence. One family reported that they talked about events that hadn't happened yet. Another said they had identical nightmares every night, screaming the same words at the same time. A third family claimed objects moved on their own when the girls were nearby. Edward absorbed this information with a mixture of scientific fascination and deep unease. Part of him, the rational part trained in engineering, wanted to dismiss it all as coincidences or exaggerations from superstitious people. But another part, the part that had felt something inexplicable that night at the hotel, knew he was facing something that completely escaped his understanding of the world. "Where are they living now?" he asked. "At St. Teresa's Shelter, an institution run by the Hope Foundation in the Bronx. It's a temporary place for children awaiting placement in foster families or who have special needs for monitoring." Carla paused, observing Edward's concentrated expression. "May I ask why you're interested in these girls? Did something happen at the gala that I missed?" Edward hesitated for a moment, considering how much he should reveal to his assistant. He decided on partial honesty. "They approached me during the event and said some things that caught my attention. They seemed very mature for their age, as if they knew things they shouldn't know." "And what did they say?" "That they could help me," Edward replied simply. "That they had knowledge about healing that could be useful for my condition." Carla frowned, concerned. She had known Edward long enough to know he was not a credulous or easily impressed person. If something had piqued his interest in this way, there was probably substance behind it. "Edward, with all due respect, you've tried every possible treatment. The best doctors in the world were categorical about your condition. Don't you think you might be deluding yourself?" "Maybe," he admitted, "but I can't stop thinking about what I felt when they touched my legs. It was different, Carla. It wasn't my imagination." The assistant sighed, recognizing the determination in his voice. "What do you want me to do?" "I want to visit them. Arrange a meeting at St. Teresa's Shelter for tomorrow afternoon. Say that I'm considering making a donation to the institution and would like to get to know the work they do better. Are you sure about this?" Edward looked out his office window, contemplating the view of the Hudson River stretching toward the New Jersey skyline. For the first time in 15 years, he felt he was about to make a decision that could fundamentally change the course of his existence. "I am," he replied with conviction. "And Carla, keep this between us for now." The next day, Edward drove his adapted Mercedes through the bustling streets of the Bronx, accompanied only by his driver and security, Robert. St. Teresa's Shelter was in a modest neighborhood, very different from the luxurious environments he was used to. The 3-story building had a faded yellow facade and a small but well-kept garden, where some children played under the supervision of educators. The institution's director, Sister Agnes, a 60-year-old nun with kind eyes and hands calloused by work, received Edward with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. It was rare for businessmen of his stature to visit their facilities in person. "It's an honor to have you here, Mr. Thorne," she said, leading him through the simple but clean corridors of the shelter. "When your assistant called, we could hardly believe it. Your company has already made generous donations to our foundation, but we never expected a personal visit." Edward smiled politely, but his attention was focused on finding Isabella and Sophia. He watched every child's face that passed through the corridors, searching for those penetrating blue eyes he couldn't forget. "I would very much like to get to know your work better," he said, "especially how you deal with children who have special needs or atypical behaviors." Sister Agnes stopped walking and looked at him with a slightly worried expression. "Are you referring to any specific child, Mr. Thorne?" "Actually, yes. I met two twin sisters at the charity gala last week, Isabella and Sophia Meadows. I was impressed by their maturity and would like to talk with them a bit more." The nun's expression changed completely, becoming more serious and cautious. "Ah, the Meadows girls. They are special cases. Very special." "In what way?" Sister Agnes hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. "They are extremely intelligent and sensitive children. Sometimes they show a perception that goes beyond what we would expect for their age. Some people find that unsettling. And you? What do you think of them?" "I think they are girls who carry a very heavy burden for such young children," the nun replied sincerely. "They lost their mother very early, went through several families who didn't know how to handle their peculiarities. They have closed themselves off, trusting only each other." Edward nodded, feeling an unexpected emotional connection to that situation. He too had closed himself off after his accident, trusting only himself and his determination to overcome adversity. "May I speak with them?" Sister Agnes led him to a small inner garden where Isabella and Sophia were sitting on a wooden bench, reading the same book at the same time, each holding one side. When they saw Edward approaching in his wheelchair, their faces lit up with genuine smiles. "Mr. Thorne," exclaimed Isabella, closing the book and running toward him, "we knew you would come to see us." Sophia followed her, and both positioned themselves beside the wheelchair as if they were old friends reuniting after a long separation. "You knew?" Edward asked, intrigued. "We dreamed about you. Last night," Sophia explained simply. "We saw you arriving here, we saw our conversation, we saw many things that are still to happen." Sister Agnes discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone, but Edward noticed she continued to watch from a distance, clearly concerned about the development of that conversation. "What exactly did you dream about?" Edward asked, trying to maintain a casual tone despite the shiver he felt running up his spine. Isabella and Sophia looked at each other with that silent communication they seemed to master perfectly. "We dreamed that you are going to take us to live with you," said Isabella, "that we will help you walk again and you will help us find our place in the world. And we dreamed that this will change many people's lives," Sophia added, "not just ours and yours, but other people who need healing and hope." Edward felt his heart race. It was impossible for two 8-year-old children to articulate such complex concepts with such naturalness, unless they truly possessed some kind of special perception. "And would you like that? To come and live with me?" "We would like that very much," they both answered in unison with a sincerity that deeply touched the businessman. Edward looked at those two small girls, orphans and misunderstood, who seemed to carry secrets of the universe in their crystal blue eyes. For the first time in 15 years, he felt he had found a purpose, greater than simply accumulating wealth and expanding his business empire. "Then let's talk about it," he said, surprising himself with his own decision. "Let's figure out how we can make this happen." At that moment, sitting in the simple garden of St. Teresa's shelter, Edward Harrison Thorne knew his life was about to take a completely new turn. He had no idea that this decision would lead him down a path of discovery that would question everything he thought he knew about science, spirituality, and the limits of what is humanly possible. The legal procedures for the adoption of Isabella and Sophia proved to be surprisingly complex, even for someone with Edward's resources and influence. For 2 intense weeks, he mobilized a full team of lawyers specializing in family law, private social workers, and even a renowned child psychologist to expedite a process that would normally take months to complete. Dr. Marcus Peterson, his personal lawyer for over 10 years, initially tried to dissuade him from the decision. "Edward, are you sure about this?" he asked during a meeting in his downtown office. "Adoption is a lifelong commitment, and you've never shown any interest in fatherhood. Besides, these girls have a..." complicated history. But Edward was adamant. For the first time in many years, he had found something that awakened a genuine passion in him, a sense of purpose that went beyond the numbers in his bank accounts. He knew with an inexplicable certainty that Isabella and Sophia belonged in his life. During those 15 days, Edward visited the girls at St. Teresa's shelter every afternoon. Officially, they were supervised introductory visits, part of the protocol required for adoption processes. But in practice, these meetings became something much deeper and more transformative. Isabella and Sophia seemed to anticipate each of his visits. They were always waiting in the inner garden, dressed in their best dresses, as if they knew exactly what time he would arrive. They talked about subjects ranging from basic philosophy to surprising details about Edward's life that no one could have told them. "You dreamed about our mother last night," Sophia said during one of these visits as they walked through the shelter's corridors. Edward stopped his wheelchair abruptly. It was true. He had dreamed of a woman with brown hair and blue eyes who looked very much like the girls, a woman who in the dream told him to take good care of her daughters. "How do you know that?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Our mother still talks to us sometimes," Isabella explained, with the naturalness of someone commenting on the weather. "She said you are a special person, that you have an old soul and a wounded heart that needs to learn to love again." Edward felt a lump form in his throat. These children seemed to have the ability to see right through all his emotional defenses, to touch wounds he had spent 15 years trying to cauterize with obsessive work and social isolation. During one of the sessions with the psychologist responsible for evaluating the compatibility between him and the girls, Dr. Annabelle Carter, a 40-year-old woman specializing in late adoption, Edward was questioned about his true motivations. "Mr. Thorne, I need to be frank with you," she said, flipping through the report she had prepared. "In 15 years of my career, I've never seen a case like this. You've never had serious, lasting relationships, never shown interest in starting a family, and now suddenly you want to adopt 2 children with very specific emotional needs. What truly motivated you to make this decision?" Edward reflected for a long moment before answering. How could he explain to a rational professional that he felt an inexplicable connection with these girls? How could he tell her that they seemed to awaken physical sensations in him that doctors had declared impossible? "Dr. Carter," he said finally, "for 15 years I have lived a functional but empty life. I built a prosperous company, accumulated wealth, gained professional respect, but I never felt truly alive. These girls, they make me feel something I haven't experienced since before my accident, a genuine connection, a greater purpose. And do you feel prepared for the challenges of being a father, to deal with the behavioral peculiarities that Isabella and Sophia present?" "I don't know if anyone is ever truly prepared for fatherhood," Edward admitted, "but I know I can offer them stability, education, affection, and most importantly, someone who doesn't see them as strange or problematic. I see them as extraordinary." The psychologist made a few notes and then surprised him with an unexpected question. "Do you believe in paranormal phenomena, Mr. Thorne?" Edward hesitated. His entire scientific background made him automatically reject anything that couldn't be measured and rationally explained. But the last few weeks had shaken many of his certainties. "I believe there are things in the world that our current science cannot yet explain," he answered carefully. "And I believe that some people may have special sensitivities that escape us." Dr. Carter nodded, as if this answer confirmed something she already suspected. "The Meadows girls are not ordinary children, Mr. Thorne. In the last 2 years, I have witnessed behaviors that defy any conventional explanation. If you are willing to embrace this reality, without trying to normalize them or suppress their abilities, I believe you may be exactly the father they need." 3 days later, Edward received the call that would definitively change his life. Dr. Peterson called on a Thursday afternoon, his voice filled with surprise and satisfaction. "Edward, it's official. The judge has approved the adoption. Isabella and Sophia Meadows are now Isabella and Sophia Thorne. You can pick them up tomorrow." That night, Edward couldn't sleep. He roamed the empty rooms of his Upper East Side penthouse, imagining what it would be like to have 2 children filling the space that for so many years had been only his solitary refuge. He had hired a decorator specializing in children's rooms to prepare a special room for the girls, with 2 beds, a complete library, and imported educational toys. He had also arranged for the hiring of an experienced housekeeper, Mrs. Rosa, a 50-year-old woman who had worked with wealthy families and had excellent references in childcare. When he arrived at St. Teresa's shelter, the next morning to pick up Isabella and Sophia, Edward found the 2 girls waiting at the entrance with 2 small cardboard suitcases containing all their worldly belongings. They wore the blue dresses they had worn at their first meeting, but now they also carried small new school backpacks that Sister Agnes had provided as a farewell gift. "We're ready, Dad," said Isabella, using for the first time the word that made Edward's heart race uncontrollably. Sophia came closer and held his hand, intertwining her small fingers with his. "We dreamed about our new home last night. It's very beautiful, with a view of the park and a garden where we can plant flowers our mother liked." Edward looked around and noticed that all the shelter's employees were watching the farewell with a mixture of relief and concern on their faces. Clearly, everyone was happy to see the girls finally find a home, but there was an underlying unease about what might happen when Isabella and Sophia were in an environment without constant supervision. The drive to the Upper East Side was silent, with the girls observing the New York cityscape through the Mercedes windows. Edward watched, them in the rearview mirror, noticing how they seemed to absorb every detail of the city, as if memorizing a script they already knew beforehand. When they arrived at the residential building where Edward lived, the doorman, Joseph, a 60-year-old black man who had worked there for 2 decades, was visibly surprised to see the 2 girls accompanying the businessman. "Good morning, Dr. Thorne," he greeted, helping with the suitcases. "The girls are—" "My daughters," Edward replied, feeling a strange satisfaction in pronouncing those words for the first time. "Isabella and Sophia." In the private elevator that led directly to the penthouse, Sophia held Edward's hand again and said softly, "You're nervous. You can relax, Dad. We know everything will be all right." When the elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse living room, Isabella and Sophia walked to the balcony that offered a panoramic view of Central Park, Billionaire's Row, and the Midtown skyline. They stood there for several minutes, hand in hand, observing the park in an almost reverential silence. "It's exactly as we saw it," Isabella murmured. "Our mother said it would be like this," Sophia agreed. Mrs. Rosa, who had arrived an hour earlier to prepare lunch and organize the final details of the girls' room, emerged from the kitchen wiping her hands on a floral apron. She was a sturdy woman, with grey hair tied in a bun, and kind eyes that immediately filled with tenderness upon seeing the 2 girls. "So, these are the princesses," she said, approaching with a warm smile. "I'm Mrs. Rosa. I'll take care of you and help your dad Edward with whatever is needed." Isabella and Sophia turned simultaneously to greet the housekeeper, and Edward noticed a subtle change in Mrs. Rosa's expression. For a moment she seemed disoriented, as if she had seen something she couldn't quite process. "What beautiful eyes you have," she said, quickly recovering. "Blue as the sky." "You are a good person," Sophia said simply. "We can feel it." During lunch, which Mrs. Rosa had prepared especially with children's tastes in mind, Edward watched fascinated as Isabella and Sophia interacted with their surroundings. They seemed to intuitively know the location of all the rooms, moved through the penthouse as if they had lived there for years, and occasionally made comments about objects or architectural details that mysteriously caught their attention. "This painting is very sad," said Isabella, pointing to an abstract painting Edward had bought at an auction years before. "The artist was suffering when he painted it." Edward looked at the work, a predominantly dark canvas with violent brushstrokes of red and black paint. He had never researched the artist, buying it only because it matched the minimalist decor of his living room. "How do you know that?" "We feel the emotions that get embedded in things," Sophia explained naturally. "Some people leave traces of feelings on the objects they touch when they are going through very intense moments." Mrs. Rosa, who was serving dessert, stopped what she was doing and looked at the girls with an expression of surprise and apprehension. After lunch, Edward showed the girls the room he had prepared for them. The room was large and bright, with 2 single beds decorated with pink bedspreads, a bookshelf filled with children's and educational books, carefully selected toys, and a study desk equipped with a computer and school supplies. But to his surprise, Isabella and Sophia seemed more interested in the view the room offered of a small inner garden of the building than in the expensive items he had provided. "Can we plant some things down there?" Isabella asked, pointing to an empty flower bed in the garden. "Special herbs that our mother taught us to grow," Sophia added, "plants that help with healing and bring positive energies." Edward nodded, touched by the simplicity of the girls' requests in contrast to all the luxury he had tried to provide to impress them. On that first night together, while Mrs. Rosa helped the girls with their bath and preparations for bed, Edward felt invaded by a mixture of genuine happiness and anxiety about the challenges that lay ahead. He had spent 15 years living a completely predictable and controlled routine. Now suddenly, he was responsible for 2 children who seemed to carry mysteries he was only beginning to understand. Around 9 o'clock, after Isabella and Sophia were already in their beds, Edward went to their room to say goodnight. He found them awake, lying side by side in one of the beds, whispering to each other in voices so low he couldn't distinguish the words. "Can't you sleep?" he asked, approaching in his wheelchair. "We're talking to our mother," Isabella replied without any embarrassment. "She wanted to know if we like the new house and if you are being kind to us." Edward felt that familiar shiver run up his spine again. "And what did you tell her?" "That you are exactly as she said you would be," Sophia answered. "A person with a broken heart, but with a lot of love stored up waiting to be discovered." "And did she say anything else?" The girls looked at each other with that silent communication they mastered perfectly. "She said that tomorrow we can start helping you for real," Isabella revealed, "that your legs are ready to receive our energy." Edward swallowed hard. For weeks he had mentally prepared for this possibility, but now that the moment was approaching, he felt a mixture of anticipation and fear that left him almost paralyzed with emotion. "Are you sure you can do this?" "We are," they both answered in unison. "Our mother taught us everything we need to know before she left. She said we would find someone special who would need our help, and that by helping this person, we would also find our true home." That night, Edward stayed awake very late, staring at the ceiling of his room and wondering if he was on the verge of experiencing a miracle or if he was allowing himself to be carried away by a desperate fantasy. But for the first time in 15 years, he fell asleep with a smile on his face and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, his life was about to become much more interesting and meaningful than he had ever imagined possible. Outside, the city hummed with a gentle energy, and the lights of the skyline created a golden mantle over the New York night. Inside the penthouse, a new family had formed, united not by ties of blood, but by something much deeper and more mysterious that was only just beginning to reveal itself. The morning of Isabella and Sophia's first Saturday in their new home dawned with a crystal-clear sky and a gentle breeze that carried the urban scent of a New York morning. Edward woke up earlier than usual, around 5 o'clock, with an anxiety that mixed anticipation and apprehension about what the girls had promised the night before. For 15 years, he had learned to control his emotions, to maintain a facade of businesslike tranquility even in the most challenging situations. But that morning he felt like a teenager about to take his first major exam. He followed his usual morning routine, strengthening exercises in the private gym installed in one of the rooms of his penthouse, an assisted shower with the special adaptations that allowed his independence, and the breakfast that Mrs. Rosa always prepared with military precision. However, everything seemed different that day. The colors seemed more vivid, the sounds sharper, as if his senses were heightened by the possibility of what was to come. Isabella and Sophia appeared in the kitchen around 7 o'clock, already dressed in simple, comfortable clothes Edward had bought for them during the week, jeans and white t-shirts that further enhanced the penetrating blue of their eyes. They walked over to where he was having coffee, and without any ceremony, Isabella placed one of her small hands on his shoulder. "It's time," she said simply, as if announcing it was time to go to school. Edward felt his heart race. "Are you sure you want to do this? You don't have to feel obligated just because you're living here now." Sophia laughed softly. a crystal-clear sound that echoed through the spacious kitchen. "Dad, we're not here out of obligation. We're here because this was always our destiny. Our mother prepared us for this moment since we were born." Mrs. Rosa, who was organizing the breakfast dishes, stopped her activities and looked at the small group with a worried expression. She had worked in many houses over the years, had cared for dozens of different children, but she had never witnessed anything like the maturity and determination that emanated from those two 8-year-old girls. "Mr. Thorne," she said hesitantly, "are you sure this is safe?" Edward looked at Mrs. Rosa, then at Isabella and Sophia, and finally made a decision that would change his life forever. "I don't know if it's safe, Mrs. Rosa, but I know I have to try." The girls led Edward to the main living room, with its enormous windows offering a panoramic view of Central Park. They asked him to position himself near the balcony so that the morning's natural light would completely illuminate the room. Isabella and Sophia moved with perfect synchrony, as if performing a choreography they had rehearsed hundreds of times. "First, you need to relax completely," instructed Sophia, positioning herself to the right of Edward's wheelchair. "Close your eyes and try to empty your mind of all thoughts about medicine, science, and limitations." Isabella positioned herself to the left and added, "You need to believe that your body remembers what it was like before the accident. All the neural connections still exist. They are just dormant, waiting to be awakened." Edward obeyed, closing his eyes and trying to follow the girl's instructions. It was harder than he imagined. For 15 years he had conditioned himself to accept the medical reality of his condition, not to entertain vain hopes of impossible recoveries. Now 2 children were asking him to completely discard this scientific rationality and open himself to possibilities that defied everything he knew about anatomy and neurology. The girls placed their small, warm hands on his legs, exactly as they had done that first night at the hotel. But this time, the sensation was much more intense. Edward could feel a pulsating energy emanating from the palms of their hands, as if small electric currents were running through his atrophied muscles. "Our mother is here with us," Isabella whispered. "She is helping to guide our energy." Edward kept his eyes closed, but he could have sworn he felt an additional presence in the room, something warm and maternal that seemed to envelop him like a protective hug. Sophia began to murmur words in a language Edward did not recognize. It didn't sound like English, Spanish, or any European language he was familiar with. The sounds were melodic, almost musical, and seemed to resonate not only in his ears, but throughout his entire body. As the minutes passed, Edward began to experience sensations he hadn't felt in a decade and a half. First, it was a subtle tingling in his hips, then an almost imperceptible vibration that spread through his thigh, muscles. It was as if something that had been asleep for years was slowly waking up. "Can you feel it?" asked Isabella, her voice filled with expectation. "Yes," murmured Edward, hardly daring to believe what he was experiencing. It's unbelievable." The sensations gradually intensified. Edward could feel the blood circulating through his legs in a way he hadn't experienced since before the accident. It was as if the neural connections that doctors had declared permanently severed were being reconnected by a force that transcended any scientific explanation. Sophia stopped murmuring and placed one of her hands on Edward's forehead. "Now try to move your toes." Edward focused all his mental attention on his feet, sending neural commands that for 15 years had resulted in absolutely nothing. But this time, to his absolute astonishment, he felt an almost imperceptible movement in the big toe of his right foot. His eyes shot open, and he looked down, observing his feet through the imported sneakers he wore. For a moment, everything was silent in the room, as if time itself had stopped to acknowledge the magnitude of what had just happened. "I did it," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "I moved my toe." Isabella and Sophia smiled simultaneously, but on their faces there was no surprise, only satisfaction at the accomplishment of something they had always known was possible. "This is just the beginning," said Isabella. "Each session will awaken more connections. But now you need to rest. Your body is not used to this energy." Edward felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. It was as if he had run a marathon, but at the same time he experienced a vitality he hadn't felt in years. His legs tingled intensely, a sensation that was both strange and wonderful. Mrs. Rosa, who had been watching the entire session from a distance, approached with an expression of absolute disbelief. "Mr. Thorne, what? How?" He looked at his faithful housekeeper and realized he had no words to explain what had just happened either. How could he describe an experience that defied everything modern medicine considered possible? "Mrs. Rosa, I think I've just witnessed something that will change my life forever," he said simply. For the rest of the day, Edward felt as if he were in an altered state of consciousness. The sensations in his legs were intermittent, like flashes of life that appeared and disappeared without warning. He spent hours discreetly testing his ability to move, concentrating intensely on different muscle groups, and occasionally achieving small, involuntary movements that filled him with hope. In the afternoon, he called Dr. Robert Andrews, his neurologist for over 10 years, a competent and respected doctor who had followed every aspect of his rehabilitation after the accident. "Robert, I need to schedule an urgent appointment," Edward said. "I want to have a full MRI and some neurological exams." Dr. Andrews seemed surprised by the urgency in Edward's tone. "Did something happen? Are you feeling pain or discomfort?" Edward hesitated for a moment. "Actually, I'm feeling things, sensations I haven't experienced in 15 years. I want to understand what's happening." The neurologist scheduled the exams for Monday morning, clearly intrigued by the change in the neurological pattern of a patient who had remained stable for so long. That evening during dinner, Isabella and Sophia chatted normally about topics typical for children their age, the books they were reading, the TV shows they liked, the differences between living in the shelter and living in the luxurious penthouse. But occasionally, they made comments that revealed their special perception of what had happened that morning. "Dad's body is remembering how to be whole," said Sophia, while enjoying a spoonful of chocolate ice cream. "It's like teaching someone to ride a bike again." "Our mother said it will take a few weeks for everything to get back to normal," Isabella added. "But she also said that Dad is strong and determined, so the process will be faster than usual." Edward watched his adopted daughters with growing admiration. How could two such young children carry such profound knowledge about healing and energy anatomy? How could they talk about their deceased mother as if she were still present in their lives? "Can I ask a question?" he said, putting down his fork. "How did you learn to do this? Did your mother really teach you these techniques?" The girls looked at each other with that silent communication they mastered perfectly. "Our mother was different," Isabella explained. "She could see things that other people couldn't see, energies, auras, spiritual connections between people. And she taught us that some people are born with special gifts," Sophia continued. "Gifts that should be used to help those who are suffering. But she also taught us that these abilities scare a lot of people," Isabella added with a subtle sadness in her voice. "That's why we went through so many families who couldn't understand us." Edward felt a pang of paternal protectiveness. "You will never have to worry about that again. Here, you can be exactly who you are without fear of judgment or rejection." That night, as he prepared for bed, Edward experienced a completely new sensation in his nightly routine. When he transferred from his wheelchair to the bed, he felt a subtle muscular resistance in his legs, as if they were trying to participate in the movement. It was a sensation so subtle it could have been his imagination, but he knew it wasn't. Around 2 in the morning, he woke up with a strange feeling. His legs seemed to be vibrating internally, as if electrical energy were coursing through all his muscles. It wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it was almost comforting, as if his body were healing itself while he slept. He sat up in bed and, on an impulse, focused all his mental attention on flexing his right knee. To his absolute astonishment, he achieved an almost imperceptible but definitely real movement. Tears began to stream down his face, tears of a gratitude and hope he hadn't experienced in decades. He got into his wheelchair and went to the girls' room. He found them awake, sitting together on one of the beds, as if they had been waiting for him. "We knew you would come," Sophia said with a gentle smile. "Did you feel the muscles moving?" Edward nodded, still too emotional to speak. "It's normal," Isabella explained. "The body is relearning to remember itself. In the coming weeks, the movements will get stronger and more coordinated." "How do you know all this?" The girls got up and walked to him, each holding one of his hands. "Because our mother went through something similar," Sophia revealed. "She also had physical problems before she discovered her healing gifts. And when she learned to heal others, she discovered she could also heal herself. And she taught us that when we use our gifts to help good people," Isabella added, "the universe repays us with special blessings." Edward looked at those two extraordinary girls and realized that his life had transformed into something much deeper and more significant than he had ever imagined. He wasn't just gaining a family. He was discovering aspects of human existence that transcended everything he thought he knew about reality, science, and possibilities. In that early morning, sitting in his daughter's room, with their small hands holding his and the full moon illuminating the park view through the window, Edward Harrison Thorne understood that he was living the beginning of a miracle that would change not only his ability to walk, but his understanding of who he truly was and what he was capable of becoming. The sounds of the city continued their soft hum below, but for Edward, the sound was no longer just the noise of traffic. It was the soundtrack of his transformation, the steady rhythm of a new life that was just beginning to reveal itself in all its extraordinary possibility. Monday dawned overcast, with a fine rain that painted the windows of Edward's penthouse grey. He had woken up at 5 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than usual, with an anxiety that grew with each passing minute. In a few hours, he would be in Dr. Robert Andrews' office, undergoing tests that could either scientifically confirm what he knew in his heart was happening, or completely destroy the hope that had been reborn in his life. Over the weekend, Isabella and Sophia had conducted 2 more healing sessions, and with each encounter, Edward felt more significant changes in his body. On Saturday night, he had managed to slightly flex his left knee. On Sunday morning, he had felt an almost electric sensation run the entire length of his right thigh. On Sunday night, for the first time in 15 years, he had fallen asleep, feeling his feet. The girls seemed to monitor every aspect of his progress, with a medical precision that strangely contrasted with their apparent ages. They knew exactly when he was experiencing new sensations, could predict which muscles would be the next to respond, and occasionally made subtle adjustments to their healing techniques based on information they claimed to receive directly from their deceased mother. "Dad, today the tests are going to show things that will confuse the doctors," Isabella said during breakfast, as she spread strawberry jam on a slice of whole wheat toast. Sophia nodded, taking a sip of fresh orange juice. "They're going to see that the nerve connections are regenerating, but they won't be able to explain how." "It's possible." Edward watched his adopted daughters, still marveling at the naturalness with which they discussed complex neurological concepts. "And what do you think I should tell Dr. Andrews?" "The truth," they both answered in unison, as if the answer were obvious. "What truth? That 2 8-year-old girls are curing my paraplegia through spiritual energy? He'll think I've developed some kind of psychological disorder." Isabella laughed softly, a sound that always managed to calm Edward in his most anxious moments. "Dad, good doctors are the ones who get curious when confronted with things they can't immediately explain. If Dr. Andrews is really a good doctor, he'll want to understand what's happening instead of simply denying it." 2 hours later, Edward was at the most modern neurological clinic in New York City, a glass and steel building in Hudson Yards, equipped with the most advanced diagnostic imaging devices available in the country. Dr. Robert Andrews, a thin, grey-haired man of 50, had been his neurologist since the first months after the accident. He was a competent and meticulous professional, known for his rigorous scientific approach and his brutal honesty when communicating diagnoses. "Edward, in 15 years of following your case, this is the first time you've requested tests because of different sensations," Dr. Andrews said, as he reviewed the medical file that filled 3 thick binders. "Can you describe exactly what you're experiencing?" Edward took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Robert, in the last few days I've started feeling tingling and small muscle contractions in areas that haven't responded in 15 years. I've managed to slightly move some of my toes and subtly flex my knees." The neurologist looked up from the documents, a professionally skeptical expression on his face. "Edward, You know that cases of spontaneous neurological regeneration in complete spinal cord injuries are extremely rare in medical literature. In fact, they are practically non-existent in injuries with the time progression of yours. I know, Edward replied, but I also know what I'm feeling. And I know that something has fundamentally changed in my body in the last few days. Dr. Andrews studied Edward's face for a long moment. He had known this man long enough to know he was not given to fantasies or self-deception. If Edward was reporting physical sensations, there was probably something real happening. "All right," he said finally, "let's do a full battery of tests: MRI of the spine, electromyography, CT scan, nerve conduction studies. If there really are neurological changes happening, we'll identify them." For the next 4 hours, Edward underwent a series of detailed examinations. The technicians operating the equipment noticed something unusual from the very first tests. The electromyography, which measured the electrical activity of muscles, was showing signs of life in regions that had remained completely inert for 15 years. "This is very strange," murmured the technician in charge of the exam, a young woman with black hair named Dr. Fernanda. "I'm seeing neural activity in muscles that, according to..." His file shouldn't have responded to stimuli for over a decade. When the MRI was ready, Dr. Andrews called Edward back to his office with an expression that mixed perplexity and scientific excitement. "Edward, I need you to tell me exactly what has happened in the last few days," he said, placing the MRI images on an illuminated light box. "And I want you to be completely honest with me, even if you think I'll find your explanation unusual." Edward looked at the images of his spinal column projected on the screen. Even without medical training, he could see that there was something different in the images compared to previous exams. "The images show signs of neuronal regeneration that are medically impossible," Dr. Andrews continued, pointing to specific regions of the spinal cord. "There's evidence of reconnection of nerve fibers that were completely severed. It's as if your body is healing itself." Edward took a deep breath and decided to trust Isabella and Sophia. He told the doctor about meeting the girls, about the adoption, about the energy healing sessions they had conducted. He left out only the most fantastic details, like the conversations with their deceased mother, but was honest about the unconventional techniques being applied. Dr. Andrews listened to him in silence, occasionally taking notes, without interrupting or showing judgment. When Edward finished his explanation, the doctor remained silent for several minutes, studying the exam images again. "Edward, I have 2 options before me," he said finally. "I can dismiss your reports as impossible and attribute these neurological changes to some medical phenomenon we don't yet understand, or I can accept that there is something happening here that goes beyond my traditional scientific training. And which option do you choose?" Dr. Andrews leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been a doctor for 25 years, Edward. I've seen many things that science still can't fully explain. The human body is much more complex and mysterious than we like to admit. If these girls truly possess some kind of special therapeutic ability, well, who am I to question results I can see clearly in objective tests?" Edward felt a wave of relief. He had feared that Dr. Andrews would try to dissuade him from continuing the healing sessions or suggest a psychiatric evaluation. "What do you recommend?" "I recommend that we continue to monitor your progress closely," the neurologist replied. "I want to repeat these tests in 2 weeks. If the neural regeneration continues at its current rate, you could be walking again in a few months." Leaving the clinic, Edward felt both validated and overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. He called Carla and cancelled all his appointments for the rest of the afternoon. He wanted to go home, be with Isabella and Sophia, and process everything he had discovered. When he arrived at the penthouse, he found the girls on the balcony garden planting herb seedlings in small ceramic pots. They looked up as he appeared, and their faces lit up with smiles that seemed to anticipate the good news he brought. "The tests confirmed it," Sophia said, without him needing to say a word. "Dr. Andrews will want to meet you," Isabella added, continuing to plant her seedlings. "He's a curious person, not afraid of the unknown." Edward moved his wheelchair closer to the makeshift garden the girls were creating. "How do you always know everything before I tell you?" "Our mother tells us," they explained simultaneously. That afternoon, the girls conducted the most intense healing session yet. Edward could feel waves of energy coursing through his legs, as if small explosions of life were happening in every muscle fiber. During the session, he managed to visibly flex both knees, move all his toes, and even feel when Isabella touched different points on his calves. "Tomorrow we're going to try something different," Isabella said after they finished the session. "Our mother said you're ready for the next level." "What next level?" Sophia smiled mysteriously. "Attempting to stand." That night, Edward called Dr. Andrews and shared the additional progress he had experienced during the day. The doctor scheduled an appointment for the next day, confessing that he was genuinely fascinated by the case and interested in meeting the girls in person. "Edward, in my entire career, I have never seen neurological regeneration happen at this speed," Dr. Andrews said over the phone. "If these children truly possess some kind of special therapeutic ability, it could revolutionize our understanding of healing and rehabilitation." The next morning, Dr. Andrews visited Edward's penthouse, accompanied by a neurological colleague, Dr. Mariana Sanchez, a specialist in integrative medicine. Both arrived with the scientific attitude of researchers investigating an unexplained phenomenon, but open to the possibility of witnessing something extraordinary. Isabella and Sophia received the doctors with the same naturalness with which they would greet neighbors. They showed no nervousness or intimidation in the face of professionals who might question their methods. On the contrary, they seemed enthusiastic about the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities to people who could understand the scientific significance of what they were doing. "Doctors, you may observe our session with Dad," Isabella said politely, "but you must promise not to try to interfere or question our methods while we are working." Dr. Andrews and Dr. Sanchez agreed, positioning themselves at a respectful distance as the girls began their routine. For the next hour, the two doctors witnessed something that completely challenged their traditional scientific training. They saw Edward achieve voluntary muscle contractions in muscle groups that should have been permanently inactive. They observed neurological reflexes being restored in real time, and in the most extraordinary moment of the session, they witnessed Edward manage to slightly lift both legs from the wheelchair for the first time in 15 years. When the session ended, Dr. Andrews approached Isabella and Sophia with an expression of deep respect. "Girls, you have just shown me something that will change my understanding of the limits of medicine," he said sincerely. "Would it be possible for us to learn about your techniques? There are other patients who could benefit enormously from this type of treatment." Isabella and Sophia looked at each other with that silent communication they mastered perfectly. "Our mother says you are special doctors," Sophia replied, "that you have open hearts to learn new things." "We can teach some techniques," Isabella added, "but they only work when applied by people who truly believe in the possibility of miracles." That afternoon, Edward experienced the most emotional moment since the beginning of his healing journey. With the help of Isabella and Sophia, and under the medical observation of Dr. Andrews and Dr. Sanchez, he managed to stand for almost 10 seconds, supporting himself on parallel bars they had improvised in the living room. His legs trembled with the effort. His muscles protested against an activity they hadn't performed in 15 years, but he was standing. Edward Harrison Thorne, the man who had been declared permanently paraplegic, was standing again, looking at the world from a perspective he had forgotten was possible. Tears streamed down his face, tears of gratitude, of disbelief, of a joy so profound it seemed to overflow from every cell of his being. Isabella and Sophia held his hands, one on each side, like little guardians of a miracle they had made possible. "This is just the beginning, Dad," Isabella said softly. "Soon you'll be running in the park again," Sophia added with a smile full of promise. That night, as Edward fell asleep in his bed, feeling for the first time in 15 years the weight of his legs under the covers, he understood that his life had transformed into something far more extraordinary than he had ever dared to dream. He wasn't just regaining the ability to walk, he was discovering that there are forces in the universe that transcend any limitation we can imagine. And tomorrow, he would take his first steps toward a future that promised to be filled with possibilities that not even his most optimistic imagination had managed to envision. 3 months had passed since that first meeting at the charity gala, and Edward Harrison Thorne's life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The Upper East Side penthouse, once a silent refuge for a lonely man, now echoed with children's laughter, lively conversations during meals, and the constant sound of small feet running through the marble corridors. But the most extraordinary transformation was not in the environment. It was in Edward himself. On that September morning, with the spring sun shining brightly over Central Park, Edward woke up and, for the first time in 15 years, got out of bed using only his own legs. The movement still required concentration and deliberate effort, but it was real, natural, and becoming more fluid every day. He walked to his bedroom window, contemplating the view of the park that stretched infinitely under a crystal blue sky, and felt a gratitude so profound it seemed to expand his chest beyond its physical limits. The healing sessions with Isabella and Sophia had evolved from intense, emotionally charged encounters to natural, affectionate routines that strengthened not only his body, but also the family bonds that had formed between them. The girls were no longer the mysterious, misunderstood children he had met at the shelter. They were his daughters, in the fullest and truest sense of the word, and he was the father they had always hoped to find. During these months, Dr. Robert Andrews had become more than a doctor. He had become a fascinated researcher and a genuine friend of the family. He had documented every stage of Edward's neurological regeneration, publishing preliminary articles in specialized scientific journals that caused a sensation in the international medical community. Doctors from all over the world sent emails requesting information about the case, some skeptical, others desperately interested in applying similar techniques with their own patients. Isabella and Sophia, always with a wisdom that seemed to transcend their ages, had agreed to teach their basic energy healing techniques to Dr. Andrews, Dr. Sanchez, and other carefully selected health professionals, but always with one condition. The methods could only be applied to patients who genuinely believed in the possibility of healing and were emotionally prepared to receive positive energy. "You can't heal someone who doesn't want to be healed," Isabella had explained during one of these training sessions. "The energy only flows when it finds a receptive heart and an open mind." Innovatech America had continued to thrive under Edward's renewed leadership, but now his business approach included a humanitarian dimension that had not existed before. He had created a foundation dedicated to funding research on integrative medicine and supporting orphaned children with special needs. His company developed apps and technologies aimed at facilitating access to alternative treatments and connecting patients with therapists specializing in holistic approaches. Carla, his faithful assistant, often commented that it was like working for a completely different person. The bitter, withdrawn man had transformed into someone radiant, generous, and deeply connected to purposes greater than the simple accumulation of wealth. On that special September morning, Edward had woken up with a particular sense of anticipation. Isabella and Sophia had spent the last few days talking about a special session they were going to conduct, something that would mark the official end of his physical healing process and the beginning of a new phase in their lives. After breakfast, the girls led Edward to Central Park. It was the first time in 15 years he had stepped onto the grass, feeling the soft blades between his toes, hearing the sounds of the city from a perspective he had forgotten was possible to experience. Isabella and Sophia walked beside him, one on each arm, radiating pride and satisfaction for the journey they had completed together. "Dad," said Sophia when they reached a quiet spot near the lake, "today we're going to do our last healing session. After this, your body will be completely restored." "But that doesn't mean our connection will end," Isabella added quickly. "It means it will transform into something even more beautiful." Edward sat on the grass with the girls positioned beside him as they watched the gentle ripples on the water. The rhythmic movement of the lake seemed to sync with the breaths of the three of them, creating a natural harmony that transcended any specific healing technique. Isabella and Sophia placed their hands on Edward's legs. One last time, but this time the sensation was different from all previous sessions. Instead of the intense, transformative energy that had characterized the first few months, Edward felt a deep peace and a completeness that seemed to radiate from every cell of his body. "Our mother is here," Sophia whispered. "She wants to talk to you." Edward closed his eyes, and for a moment, impossible to explain rationally, felt a maternal presence enveloping the three of them. It was as if Helena Meadows were really there, conveying gratitude for him having welcomed her daughters and pride for the man he had become. In the depths of his mind, Edward heard a soft, comforting voice. "Thank you for giving them the home they always deserved, and thank you for allowing them to give you the life that was always rightfully yours." When he opened his eyes, Isabella and Sophia were smiling with a serenity that seemed to light up the entire park around them. "It's done," Isabella said simply. "You are healed." Edward rose from the grass with a fluidity he hadn't experienced since before the accident. His muscles responded perfectly. His reflexes were completely restored. His coordination was natural and instinctive. He ran a few yards across the lawn, feeling the freedom of movement he had lost for so long, and then returned to hug his daughters with an emotion that transcended any words. "How can I ever thank you for all this?" he asked, with tears of joy streaming down his face. "By being the father we were always destined to have," Sophia replied. "And by using your healing to help other people find their own," Isabella added. In the following months, the story of Edward's miraculous recovery and the extraordinary abilities of Isabella and Sophia spread far beyond specialized medical circles. Reports in international magazines, scientific documentaries, and invitations to medical conferences around the world turned the family into global symbols of the possibility of healing that transcends the limits of conventional medicine. But Edward made sure to maintain privacy and normality in his daughters' daily lives. They continued to attend a private school on the Upper East Side, making friends, playing like normal children, and developing interests typical of their age. The only difference was that occasionally, with the careful supervision of Edward and Dr. Andrews, they helped other selected patients who had exhausted all traditional treatment options. 1 year after that first meeting at the charity gala, Edward organized a special event to mark his family's anniversary. He invited Dr. Andrews, Dr. Sanchez, Mrs. Rosa, Carla, Sister Agnes, and other friends who had accompanied his journey of transformation. The event was held in the same ballroom of the Plaza Hotel where it had all begun, but now Edward was standing, walking freely, radiating a vitality and joy that was contagious to everyone around him. Isabella and Sophia, now 9 years old, had grown and matured even more, but they maintained that special wisdom and unique connection that made them so extraordinary. They ran through the ballroom, played with other children present at the event, and occasionally made insightful comments that surprised the adults. During his thank you speech, Edward looked at the audience of people who had become his extended family and felt a gratitude that seemed to expand far beyond words. "A year ago, I was a wealthy but empty man, physically limited and emotionally isolated," he said, his voice filled with sincere emotion. "Today I am a truly rich man, not just in material possessions, but in love, purpose, and connection to something much greater than myself." He paused, looking at Isabella and Sophia, who were sitting in the front row, smiling with that special luminosity they always carried. "These two extraordinary girls not only healed my body, they healed my soul. They taught me that there are forms of love and healing that transcend any limitation we can imagine. And they showed me that sometimes, to receive a miracle, we simply need to have the courage to believe that miracles are possible." The audience applauded emotionally, but Edward wasn't finished. "Therefore, I want to announce today the creation of the Helena Meadows Institute, an organization dedicated to researching, documenting, and applying integrative healing techniques. We will work alongside the traditional medical community to expand our understanding of the limits of what is possible in human healing." Isabella and Sophia stood up and walked to where Edward was, one on each side, just as they had done on that first night when their lives intertwined forever. "Our mother is very proud," said Sophia, her voice carrying a maturity that always surprised those who heard it. "And we are also proud to be your daughters," Isabella added. 2 years later, Edward was walking through Central Park at the end of a golden afternoon, watching Isabella and Sophia play on the grass with a group of friends from school. The girls had grown into balanced and happy children, maintaining their special abilities but living normal, healthy lives. They still occasionally helped special patients through the Helena Meadows Institute, but always in moderation, and only when they felt they could truly make a difference. Edward had become a completely transformed person, not only physically healed but emotionally renewed and spiritually expanded. His relationship with Isabella and Sophia had evolved into a genuine and deep fatherhood, full of everyday moments of joy, the normal challenges of raising daughters, and a family connection based on unconditional love and mutual respect. The Helena Meadows Institute had become an internationally respected organization, facilitating scientific research on integrative medicine and offering scholarships to young researchers interested in expanding the horizons of healing. Dr. Andrews had become the Institute's scientific director, dedicating himself full-time to documenting and understanding phenomena that challenged traditional medicine. On that golden afternoon in the park, as he watched his daughters laugh and play with the carefree spirit of childhood, Edward reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them to that moment of perfect normalcy and extraordinary gratitude. He had learned that true healing was not just in the physical restoration of his body, but in opening his heart to forms of love he had never imagined possible. He had discovered that being a father was much more than simply caring for children. It was participating in a daily miracle of growth, learning, and genuine human connection. Most importantly, he had understood that life's greatest gifts often come disguised as seemingly impossible challenges, and that sometimes you have to be willing to question everything you think you know about reality to discover truths that transcend any limitation you can imagine. As the sun set over the Manhattan skyline, painting the sky with golden and pink hues that reflected softly on the park's foliage, Edward Harrison Thorne knew he had found much more than the cure for his paraplegia. He had found the cure for a life that had been limited not by his physical condition, but by his inability to believe in the possibility of everyday miracles, unconditional love, and human connections that transcend any rational understanding. Isabella and Sophia ran towards him, their hair flying in, the wind and smiles radiating the pure joy of children who knew they were deeply loved and completely accepted exactly as they were. "Dad, are we going home?" asked Isabella, holding his left hand. "Yes, let's go home," replied Sophia, holding his right hand. And the three of them walked together across the golden lawn towards their extraordinarily ordinary life, a family united by bonds that were simultaneously miraculous and completely natural, knowing that each day offered new opportunities for growth, discovery, and the silent celebration of having found each other exactly when they needed it most. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Edward, Isabella, and Sophia has deeply touched your hearts. This story reminds us that life's greatest miracles often come through the most unexpected connections, and that true love has the power to heal wounds that go far beyond what our eyes can see. If this narrative stirred emotions in you, please leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and share in the comments which moment most marked your soul. Every day we bring stories that reveal the transformative power of love, family, and the hope that resides in the human heart. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, and we look forward to seeing you at our next meeting with a new story that promises to touch your life in a unique and unforgettable way.